Wow. It's on very rare occasions that a video game leaves me absolutely speechless. And from time and time again, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 completely left me in awe at what I was playing and watching. And I can't say that for a lot of games in the past 10 years alone. There have been very few games that have made me feel the way Marvel's Spider-Man 2 made me feel. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but my personal experiences with this game are among my favorite of all time. And I can say without a doubt, Marvel Spider-Man 2 is the best superhero game I have ever played in my entire life. And I'm counting the Batman Arkham games, all of the original Spider-Man games, anything Lego related, and obviously there isn't too much of a high bar to pass when it comes to superhero games, because the Batman Arkham games were pretty much the best superhero games of all time. Marvel's Avengers wasn't really much for people to boast about, but after the first Marvel Spider-Man game came out, everybody started to wonder, will we get up to the point and reputation that Batman Arkham games had seemingly long ago? And I can confidently say Marvel Spider-Man 2 is the best superhero game I have ever played in my entire life. Now, sure, it's not perfect. I'm not saying by any means it is, but everything this game does is exactly what I wanted. And my expectations for this game were extremely high, like Snoop Dogg high. And just everything from the story, the pacing, characters, and their performances was just perfect, and even better than the first Marvel Spider-Man game by a long margin. Now, before I get into the spoilerific talk, let's talk a little bit about just the basic aspects of Marvel Spider-Man 2. Now, the first thing is the story. For the most part, every character did exactly what they should and how they should do it. Peter was, of course, his genuine funny self that's also nerdy, clumsy, and thoughtful. Miles Morales still had that teenage swag with him, bringing style to everything he does, and also teaching us a little something. Mary Jane is still that strong, independent woman that she was in the first one, even more so in Spider-Man 2, to say the least. And just all of the other characters did everything they should do in a game like this. And the pacing of the game was actually a lot faster than the first, with almost too much happening in the first 10 minutes of the game alone. The first 10 minutes set a standard for how the rest of the game will be, and it just kept getting more and more intense, tension-filled, and action-packed. Spider-Man 2 is a wild ride at the very least and extreme minimum. At certain points, Marvel Spider-Man 2 makes Part 1 look boring, but that's not a bad thing. Marvel Spider-Man 1 had incredible pacing. Sometimes, admittedly, it went a little slow, and Miles Morales proved to be a lot more fast-paced, and many people liked the pacing of Miles Morales more than Spider-Man 1. But it's because Spider-Man 1 was 19 hours long, while Spider-Man 2 is 15 hours, and they're cramming in so many characters and plot points. And Yuri Lowenthal did an incredible job as Peter Parker. And the gameplay was very similar to Part 1, but there were a lot of differences that changed the landscape of how you play and how you defeat certain enemies. For instance, there is a parry system that you can use on heavier enemies. There are special move triggers or action triggers that you can accomplish by pressing one of the bumpers and the designated button. Instead of the special moves that you unlock after you unlock a costume, all of the special moves are linked to the skill tree. There are a ton of skill trees. I feel like it would have been simpler and more of the same if, similar to Part 1, you can unlock all of those different skills and movements with each costume. But I can see how that could take away from some of the accomplishment factor. So actually earning some of these moves in the skill trees makes you feel like you actually earned it. And I think that's a good thing. See, the thing with superhero games, if the next sequel in the series does something very different, I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a way of going about the same thing in a different style. And I think Spider-Man 2 has a very different style, but is generally trying to accomplish the same thing. And this is all ultimately trying to accomplish the same thing Marvel Spider-Man 1 did. And Spider-Man 2 mostly tries to do something different with the characters, gameplay, and open world. Definitely more with the characters and gameplay. Now, you are fighting Kraven the Hunter and his hunters in this sequel, and similar with Mr. Negative's henchmen, you're going to fight Kraven's hunters a lot. And with Kraven's hunters, for the most part, it can feel a bit repetitive with the double-bladed enemies, the enemies with the nets, and the snipers that can mount on pretty much any high surface. But I would say that there were more varieties of hunters than there were of Mr. Negative's henchmen in in Part 1. So at least that's a plus. But the reason why the hunters in Part 2 feel a little more repetitive than Mr. Negative's henchmen is mainly because in this game, you fight so many of Kraven's hunters to the point of ridiculousness. I mean, I counted about 50 enemies, and I get the PlayStation 5 can handle more than the 4, but that doesn't mean you need to throw like countless enemies like it's Dynasty Warriors or something. I think the Dynasty Warriors or Web Warriors comment from a lot of reviewers is very accurate. There were certain points where you're fighting enemies for like 40 minutes straight. It's kind of ridiculous. I think they should have made the variations a little more meaningful and the combat sections a lot shorter, because Spider-Man's combat is great in bursts, but when it goes on for just way too long with almost the same exact variety of enemies for 40 minutes straight, it starts to feel a little ridiculous. But luckily there's so many variations to Spider-Man's combat in this game that it's more about finding the opportunity to use your more powerful moves other than just fighting and defeating all of the enemies. I tried to get the most stylish finishers I could, and that was my personal goal throughout the game's combat. So I didn't really hate the combat all that much. In fact, I really liked the combat for the most part. The thing is, it did run on for very long throughout the game's story, and that's the main story. With the side missions, the combat can be a bit gratuitous. But hey, as long as we don't have Screwball in this game, I'm okay. At least not from what I've seen. There hasn't been any Screwball cameos, and I really didn't like Screwball. It's like you have to take a selfie with the enemy that you just defeated. It's sort of just ridiculous and annoying, and I don't like her voice. She's a very annoying enemy streamer type character. And speaking of Screwball, the side missions in Spider-Man 2 are masterful. They feel like they would easily fit into the main story with all of its cinematics and important plot points. I couldn't believe I was playing a side mission for the most part. And there are a good number of Spider-Bot side missions, but I've always loved those, so it's fine by me. And if you don't know, with Spider-Bot, you sort of just roam around and sneak around corners through enemy bases with this tiny robot spider that can do multiple things and have different gadgets to help you out along the way. They're really cool side missions that remind me of the City That Never Sleeps DLCs, where you have to sneak into some bars and enemy bases, make sure you don't get caught. I really love those side missions, and I thought they were very creative. And of course, while you're playing these side missions, they transitioned into actual missions. So introducing the enemies or different types of enemies with Spider-Bot and then transitioning into Spider-Man to fight these enemies is kind of a cool twist for those side missions. And it's probably the most creative thing they could do with Spider-Man 2's side missions, to be honest. The only side missions I was wanting a lot throughout the game was Venom side missions. I wanted the story to flesh out Venom a little more, and I get that it's kind of a main story villain, but it would have been cool if he had the black suit to do some black suit side missions. I mean, technically there are black suit side missions, but they weren't as focused as I wanted them to be. And lastly, with the bosses in Spider-Man 2, there were certain instances where the bosses overlapped each other, Ninja Gaiden 2 style, and you had to fight pretty much 4 bosses in a row. I found that to be ridiculous. They could have just spaced out the bosses with even more gameplay or henchmen, but they decided to overlap the bosses 4 times in a row, which made the bosses feel extremely epic. So it was a good and bad thing. But again, they were trying something different with Spider-Man 2, and I couldn't help but appreciate that. Especially after fighting one boss for like an hour. It drives the tension of the situation very high when you're up to a boss's 3rd life bar and you just don't want to die. But there are checkpoints. But I haven't played Ultimate Difficulty, and I'm hoping that with Ultimate Difficulty, there are no checkpoints with the boss's life bar. If that's the case, then it actually makes a boss having multiple life bars have more of a purpose, and it hikes up the replayability of the game big time. I cannot wait to get back into this game in Ultimate Difficulty. And to end my non-spoiler review, I'm giving Spider-Man 2 a 10 out of 10. I completely love this game. It is my favorite game of all time, let alone the best superhero game I've ever played in my entire life, easily. I know there are glitches and people having issues. I haven't run into those issues personally, but Insomniac does need to fix some of those crazy glitches like the cubed costume glitch, going through the floor multiple times, or just being stuck into a wall or crashing the game at random times like I've experienced. Now, with the famous Howard side mission, I actually ran into a glitch where I got stuck into a specific car that had a lot to do with the story, and the guys outside of the car were just looking at me. It was very awkward, and I was almost about to get completely into the side mission emotionally when it just froze and I had to reload from the previous checkpoint. And that killed the momentum of that side mission, and that side mission was very important to the story. So yeah, Insomniac, please fix all of the glitches in Spider-Man 2 because it ruined the Howard side mission for me, and that's a big deal. But yeah, I would give this game a perfect 10 out of 10. But now I'm going to get started with all of the important plot points and spoilers in Spider-Man 2. And there is a lot that I loved, but also a lot of things that made me question the integrity of the director of Spider-Man 2 sometimes, about 5% of the time. Now, in terms of spoilers, let me get started with the good stuff. And that is black-suited Spider-Man. Yuri Lowenthal's performance as the black-suited Spider-Man is among the best that I've seen in a very long time. And of course, that's counting the over-exaggerated performance of the Spider-Man animated series, especially in that one scene with Shocker. It seems with every single scene with Peter Parker in the black suit, he gets more and more aggressive. And Yuri Lowenthal's performance becomes even more exaggerated and scary as the game goes on, especially with those Mary Jane sections. That part with Mary Jane in the tunnel with Black Spider-Man freaking out and slowly becoming Venom was definitely one of my favorite moments, but that was a lot of other people's favorite moment too. I think the moment that really captured it for me, showing the fury of Black Spider-Man and how angry he is at everything in general, was that moment with Kraven when he locked him in that Hulk-like prison and he started flaunting the fact that he took down Miles Morales. And as soon as that happened, Miles just says, "Oh, you're gonna get it now." And then Yuri Lowenthal just starts losing it. In this scene, Peter Parker is just going ballistic on this cage. And in that moment, I just had shivers down my spine because that's a kind of moment that I would write. If I was writing a Black Spider-Man script, I would just make Peter completely unhinged at some point while he's fighting an enemy to the death. And that's what a lot of this game felt like. It felt like you were pinned with these enemies that knew how to kill you and would not stop until you're dead. Usually with Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales' boss battles and henchman fights, you don't really feel the urgency and it just feels more like an action puzzle, which was amazing and I loved it. But in part 2, it really feels like a brawl and you just have to go all out. It sort of reminds me of, again, Ninja Gaiden 2, where it just becomes a pure action game at certain points. Without dialogue or anything else, the game just pits you against countless enemies to the point that you start to wonder, am I supposed to die in this scene? And then 10 minutes later, you win and find out that you weren't, because the fight scenes go on for a surprisingly long amount of time. But that's mainly to test out your endurance and mental capacity and how angry you are in the scene. And usually while you fight, like for example, with the fight between Black Spider-Man and Kraven, you finally get a chance to beat this guy and fight him after all he's done. And they just unleash Black Spider-Man on Kraven and you are playing as Black Spider-Man. And in that moment, you just want to beat the crap out of him as much as possible and lay as many hits on him as possible because he was mocking Spider-Man and just acting so strange and creepy throughout the entire game that it just makes you loathe Kraven, but also love Kraven. And that voice actor's performance and motion capture for Kraven was absolutely perfect. I think this is the best Kraven I have ever seen in my entire life. And I lived through the animated series, Ultimate Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, all of those shows and iterations, and I read a lot of the comics. This was the best Kraven that I've seen on screen, and just by far. Now, along with just the combat and that kind of conflict, there's also story conflicts and pacing conflict, mostly with the beginning when you actually get to fight Sandman. When I saw the sand outside of the window, I automatically jumped up and stayed silent for a little while. I know it's kind of hard to imagine me staying silent for more than 5 seconds, but I just looked at the screen and I just couldn't believe what was unfolding in the first 10 minutes of the game. And I just love that scene at the beginning where Miles Morales and Peter Parker are just trying to change into their costumes as fast as possible so they could get to the freaking island to fight Sandman. And Sandman was pretty damn good. He wasn't perfect, but it was the opening act, so the bar was set pretty low from nothing. And I think placing Sandman right at the beginning of the game was very ambitious because it shows how crazy the game is eventually going to be. And that was the plus side of Marvel Spider-Man 2 and also the downfall of it with some expectations and some scenes. because the game kind of goes to a crawl for about an hour, and then it starts ramping up with the Black Spider-Man and Kraven scenarios that we've mostly seen in the trailers and sneak peeks. But I feel like the game just tries to top itself in every single scene, and it places you in these action set pieces, like when you're trying to sneak into Kraven's mansion or base or something like that, and you have to pretend to be a waiter, and you slowly start seeing more of Kraven's culture and understanding of what kind of mindset these hunters are in. And then you just get pitted against them and start destroying everything as Black Spider-Man. You slowly just become more of an animal while going through this mansion. And that's how I saw it, some sort of conversion to Black Spider-Man's animal state of mind and Venom's animal state of mind in exchange, especially after fighting Lizard. And the fact that Venom literally ate Dr. Connor's arm, which was revealed near the end of the game, shows that he maybe has a little bit of that Lizard inside of him too, and that's why he kind of acts like it with his tongue out and everything. That more explains why he acts like that opposed to the comics and the fact that they just want to make Venom Spawn-like. And speaking of which, after Black Spider-Man becomes even more intertwined with this symbiote after touching the meteorite, his suit changes, and I thought the way his suit looked was very live-action Spawn-like. I think the way that the black suit looked after touching the meteorite was absolutely perfect and looked exactly like the concept art that I saw for the black suit. So when I initially saw the formal black symbiote Spider-Man suit, I was honestly a tiny bit disappointed on how formal and form-fitting it looked. It kind of looked like Peter had black armor with the suit symbol on it. But then after you touch the meteorite, that's when Peter looks like the traditional black symbiote, but even better in my opinion. It just started to become more and more abundantly clear that Peter Parker was wearing an actual alien, and it was getting even more grotesque and out of control. It also reminded me of the anime Guyver, and how after you take out the control unit, Guyver starts to twist and become even more out of control to the point that he just becomes a killing machine. And just everything that unfolds with Mary Jane, the black suit, I just absolutely loved. When she became Scream, I did not see that coming, and that version of Scream was a trillion times better than the Scream that we got in Let There Be Carnage or Venom 2. But seeing how Venom is capable of creating some kind of Carnage-like symbiotes, as we saw with the Web of Shadows-like open world scenarios that we're faced with at the last third of the game, I can tell just from that they already have the blueprints and stepping stones to a Carnage DLC, and that makes me unbelievably excited to see what Insomniac has in store for Spider-Man 3 and Spider-Man 2's DLCs. Now I'm going to get into the supporting characters like Mary Jane, Dr. Connors, Kraven, and I would even say Miles Morales was sort of a supporting role or co-star in this game, which I completely expected, but I didn't expect him to just get cucked by Peter Parker at some point. And that was a part of the character conflict with Peter and Miles. Peter no longer appreciated Miles because he sort of overshadowed him. Miles in the comics is a lot stronger than Peter Parker, but Peter Parker is smarter than Miles in some instances, and he is a lot more experienced. So there's sort of a back and forth with who can beat who. But in total, when Miles becomes an adult, he is the definitive most powerful Spider-Man in the Spider-Man universe from what I can see. Even more powerful than 2099, if I remember correctly. But he is also the newest Spider-Man, so Peter Parker in this game treats Miles like the beta Spider-Man, or like a lot of people are calling him, Beta Miles, in comparison with Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse's Miles Morales. And I do think that was the point of Miles Morales, to seem like he wasn't as good and to be intimidated by Peter Parker's sheer will and reputation around the city. But then he slowly starts becoming the Spider-Man that we all know and love, and he even becomes a little better than Peter Parker in some instances. When he's fighting him as Black Suit, he actually overpowers Peter Parker with his black suit on, and that's a huge feat. That means that Miles has been holding back for a very long time, and he is gradually becoming stronger and stronger to the point that he is definitely stronger than Peter Parker. But of course, I saw at the end, Peter Parker gets the anti-Venom suit. And if I remember correctly, this is the first time ever that Peter Parker donned the anti-Venom suit, or any kind of anti-Venom, in the Spider-Man universe and any of the Spider-Verses. So to see the anti-Venom suit on Peter Parker was the coolest thing I've I've ever seen that has to do with the Peter Parker Spider-Man character. And I believe that Anti-Venom is stronger than Venom itself, and that's why Anti-Venom converts Eddie Brock and all that stuff with the help of Mr. Negative. And yes, another supporting character is Mr. Negative, and I thought he was phenomenal in this game. I thought the voice acting was great. He really sold the contempt he had with what he did in the past, and him and Miles Morales just killed every scene they were in together. I thought the two paired very well, and I can't wait to see more with Mr. Negative and Miles Morales. I thought that was a very tear-jerking relationship that we saw surprisingly unfold in Spider-Man 2. And now let's get to Mary Jane. So Mary Jane in this game isn't as boring to play as she was in the first one. And a lot of people are saying, woke this, woke that. But I thought the implementation of her having a stun gun and being able to shoot Spidey webs and all that, and having the massive support that Peter Parker uncontrollably has for her because she wants to fight, and Peter Parker just can't do anything about her actions. He can't control her. And I know a lot of the reason why people don't like Mary Jane being all independent RoboCop / Rambo / Ellie from The Last of Us Part 2 kind of action hero is something that reminds people of that unfortunate Spider-Man sequel, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, when Gwen Stacy becomes proactive and she tries to defeat Electro by herself and ends up dying. I think a lot of the reason why people don't like Mary Jane doing all these things is because they secretly fear doing all these things themselves. Spider-Man is about becoming a hero no matter what, even if you don't think you deserve to become a hero. Now, because we don't think Mary Jane can do it doesn't mean she can't do it. She has been helping Spider-Man for a long time, and even in Web of Shadows, she was carrying around a huge machine gun and just mowing down symbiotes. And that was like in 2006 or something like that. And I remember seeing that and being like, whoa, that's weird. Why is Mary Jane with Luke Cage and destroying all these symbiotes like they're nothing? But that wasn't the point to make Mary Jane seem invincible. It's the fact that we know she's not invincible and she's still doing all of these things and being extremely careful to do these things correctly. Now, there were some instances where she seemed overpowered, yes. Like when she was simply just running in front of the enemy, and the game tells you to do this. And she just kicks the back of the hunter's knee, tripping him as if he had papier-mâché knees, and then zapping him in the neck with a taser. And here's the thing about that. I think the reason why Mary Jane could get away with that is mainly because nobody expects just a random reporter to run up to you and do those kind of moves. And who knows what Mary Jane was doing on her downtime, especially after knowing she's going to be in a lot of danger as a reporter, as Spider-Man's girlfriend, and she's trying extremely hard. Maybe she took some fighting lessons. It seems like she did. Fighting lessons aren't unheard of, and self-defense lessons are recommended to a lot of people, especially women. So getting on that topic, I had zero problems with Mary Jane being all badass and doing this and that, because it honestly felt like I was playing The Last of Us, which I love that series, so I really don't have any issues. Mary Jane going and fighting these hunters, they are just henchmen after all, and she did take out Mr. Negative's henchmen in part 1 when she was even less experienced. So Mary Jane doing all those things, I have no problem. But there were some things that I thought were unnecessary, like the fact that Mary Jane had to take a motorcycle everywhere. I thought she could just hitch a ride with one of the Spider-Men and just swing there instead of taking a motorcycle and having one of the Spider-Men babysit her to make sure she doesn't get taken out while riding in a motorcycle. And I guess on her GPS or navigational system, she had avoid tendrils to get to the center of Manhattan. Because if I remember correctly, there were tendrils everywhere. It was actually difficult for anybody to travel with car, motorcycle, or any kind of vehicle. So seeing Mary Jane just drive in a straight line without running into any tendrils or any tentacles or anything like that, or any enemies at all, was very strange. I mean, she was dodging some enemies near the end, but the fact that they got there in like 20 minutes time. Now, I'm pretty sure with traffic, it takes about 30 minutes to go from Queens to Manhattan, especially the center of Manhattan. And that's the very least. Now, what are the odds that Mary Jane didn't run into any tendrils or blockage in that long way from Queens to the center of Manhattan? I just see that as an unrealistic exception for an independent character like Mary Jane. You didn't see anybody else taking any kind of vehicle outside or going anywhere. She was the only person to do this. Now, if I was writing this, I would actually make other characters go out and try to help people and show other characters taking vehicles places. But you didn't see that at all, especially while the city was overrun by symbiotes with tendrils everywhere. So that was the only thing I found ridiculous. The fact that they had to make Mary Jane ride a motorcycle, even though it was probably impossible to ride a motorcycle from point A to point B 100%. Especially the fact that Venom has taken over Harry Osborn, which is a bona fide genius besides Peter Parker. So you would think he would set up some kind of foundation to prevent people from just driving straight there, especially since he can make whatever he wants. I mean, for God's sake, he makes wings at the end of this game and he flies around like a bat. But that was the only unrealistic thing that Mary Jane did that I had somewhat of a problem with. She just had to be a badass on a motorcycle. It was a pretty desperate way of making Mary Jane seem so cool and pandering to a specific group of people. I don't know who these specific group of people are, but come on, dude. I don't think the game needed that. I actually started laughing when I saw the fact that Mary Jane rode her motorcycle all the way to the center of Manhattan. Now, that's the only small gripe I had with Mary Jane's portrayal. Besides that, with Scream, I thought that was very intense. Of course, she was saying some stuff to Peter that could be considered abusive, but that's the point of Venom. He is, and it is, like an abusive partner that doesn't want to let go. An obsessed, egotistical, self-centered, insecure, and misshapen being with a warped personality. And in this game, Venom and all of his remnants were perfectly portrayed. And honestly, they could have just had Venom in this game, and I would have rated it a 10 out of 10 anyway. But not only was Venom and Black Suit in this game, but they were portrayed beyond perfect, in my opinion, expectation, and standards. I am a Venom and Black Suit Spider-Man addict. I have portable consoles like the Steam Deck and ROG Ally, and I almost completely picked the ROG Ally because it was a lot easier to play Spider-Man Web of Shadows on there. But that would have been shallow and very one-sided. But if a system can play Spider-Man Web of Shadows, that's my system. I play that game over and over and over again to the point of dizziness. I remember soon after watching the first Venom film in theaters and listening to that Eminem track go off at the end, I went straight to GameStop and bought Spider-Man Web of Shadows for the 360 and repurchased a refurbished Xbox 360. And it all cost me like $90. So the game and system weren't cheap, but I did it because sometimes I'm in such a mood to play anything Venom related that I will just stop whatever I do and buy whatever I need to or mod whatever I need to in order to have the black suit on or to experience any kind of awesome Venom content. So yes, if you were trying to figure it out, I like Spider-Man 2 so much more than Spider-Man 1. Whoever says Spider-Man 1 is better, they have something I call nostalgia deficiency. It's when nostalgia takes away from anything because it's number 2 or number 3. As Spider-Man 2 is as a standalone game, it is a lot better than part 1 in my opinion because it has enemies that I actually love, as characters I love to see, and the story is just heart-pounding from the very start to the very end. And all of those small pacing issues that I mentioned before, they were kind of a break from those intense rhythmic story beats that just lead from one aspect of the story to another almost instantly. Everything about Spider-Man 2 was very instant. You didn't have to wait for anything. There were no loading screens, and there was barely any time to catch your breath. But when those moments came, I couldn't help but absolutely appreciate them. And I love the side missions in Spider-Man 2. A lot of people say the side missions in Spider-Man 2 are kind of ridiculous. I think they're better than most superhero games' side missions. And they're very lighthearted and heartfelt. And those were all the massive positives of Spider-Man 2. Now, the negatives would be just the glitching. I think Spider-Man 2 had a ton of glitches. It crashed on me twice. There's a sort of spatial glitch. When you touch edges of particular stages, everything freezes, even elements, and the game itself just keeps going on, but all of the models and characters just freeze and don't do anything, so it's impossible to interact and move forward. There were about 5 instances where that happened in very important parts, and a lot of the times it happened after like the second wave of enemies. And each wave is like 10 to 20 minutes. So just imagine how depressed I was whenever those glitches would show up. But that is how amazing Spider-Man 2 is. Even with those ridiculous glitches, I still went on and I still played it over and over again. I remember the first time I played Spider-Man 2, I rented a PlayStation 5. So that was actually the first time I inserted my gamer tag into the PlayStation 5. And I didn't know, but I signed in as a guest. So I played the game for about 6 hours. And after messing with the settings and deleting my profile by mistake, apparently if you're signed in as guest, it will automatically delete all of your saved data. And I didn't see those tiny letters next to that point. So I had to replay an entire 6 hours of Spider-Man 2, which, because the story is very intense, it sort of exhausted me. And it's very hard to exhaust me when I play any kind of game. I do get overwhelmed by visuals, and Spider-Man 2 has among the best visuals I've ever seen in any game. But going back to the negative, it is kind of difficult to game on the PlayStation 5. I really wouldn't recommend it. I like gaming on PC a lot more because you could control everything. As an adult, I just like more control. I find that as a positive. So with the PlayStation 5, it sort of takes that control away from you in a lot of ridiculous ways, actually. But the good thing about PlayStation 5 is it's extremely fast and a lot of things are instant. So if Spider-Man 2 glitched out, crashed, I could just get right back into the game within 5 seconds. It was very easy to replay stages and all that, and skip all kinds of cutscenes. It took me about 2 hours to do my 6 hours of gameplay because most of that was actually cutscenes. That's another thing. Spider-Man 2 has a lot of cutscenes and a lot of important parts that could be QuickTime events, but it seems like they just chalked it up to a cutscene here and there to sum up what's going to happen and transition you into the next stage, opposed to just going to the next stage yourself. It seems like with Spider-Man 2, Insomniac wanted to make it a lot more fast-paced. In fact, 100% more fast-paced than Spider-Man 1. So there won't be areas where you're just walking to the next destination or going in some type of event to get to the next location. Most likely there will be a cutscene that gets you to that next point of transition. And even though some set pieces felt limited compared to Part 1, and especially Miles Morales, there were so many absolutely insane set pieces with so many moving parts and complex movements. I couldn't even comprehend everything that Spider-Man was doing in one scene to the next. And unfortunately, about half of those complex movements are in cutscenes, but a good number of them are QuickTime events. So that's another positive and a slight negative, but I'm only nitpicking here. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was everything I wanted and a lot more. Insomniac made sure to put every important aspect of Spider-Man and Venom's dynamic into this game. But yeah, I think Spider-Man 2 is extraordinary. And the game doesn't have to be perfect to be extraordinary. In fact, it has to go against that ordinary in order to be extraordinary. And it mainly has to be passionate and unique. And that's exactly what Spider-Man 2 is. Insomniac takes all the chances to elevate the story and succeeds perfectly. This game undoubtedly surpassed my expectations, and I cannot wait to play again, especially in harder difficulties. I had an absolute blast, and this is easily the best superhero game I've ever played. It is so much better than Arkham Knight, and it's a little better than Arkham City. I love Batman Arkham City. In fact, I think Batman Arkham City was the best superhero game of all time. But now with Spider-Man 2, I can humbly say that this is the new best superhero game of all time. I think a lot of its imperfections are sort of misunderstood. I really don't see anything wrong with this game. But there were so many sections in this game, especially the side missions, where you felt like everything was impactful and everything changed the story in a meaningful way. But yeah, there's so much I can say about Spider-Man 2. But let me know what you think about Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Is it your game of the year? Because it is 100% my game of the year. I don't care if Resident Evil 9 comes out this year. And if you waited this long in the video, I'm going to talk about the most important part about Spider-Man 2, and that is the Venom section. When you eventually gain control of Venom after that first cutscene, I couldn't even believe it. I had to pause it multiple times and just sat there looking at the screen with my jaw on the floor, through the floor, to my downstairs neighbor's floor. Venom controls perfectly. It kind of reminds me of X-Men Origins Wolverine's controls, where you can actually lunge at people. And I was ready for Venom to just start eating people like an Ultimate Spider-Man. But as soon as you get started with that gameplay, the rhythm and just fighting techniques of Venom is just out of control, and it feels like a homicidal Hulk just running around. I completely lost my shit with that Venom section, and I just couldn't believe how fucking amazing it was. It was everything I wanted. They literally delivered on everything I wanted. And because of that, I don't understand why a person would give it a 9. If it gives you everything you want, it makes no sense. There were no sections that hindered on the game. It just added a little weird quirk to it. And I think adding weird is showing that the developers are trying to add something different to it. And I think different is also awesome. I don't think everything in Spider-Man 2 needed to be like Spider-Man 1. It made no sense to do that, especially since you're in the same location, playing as the same character. Sure, the story's going to be different, but if it played exactly the same, if they went about bosses in the same exact way, then why even play part 2 if it's going to be exactly the goddamn same? I think a lot of people look at different with nostalgia glasses. You don't have to have nostalgia for Marvel Spider-Man 1. It's not that old yet. So when I think of Spider-Man 2, it's a different kind of perfect for me. Marvel Spider-Man 1 for me would definitely be a 9 out of 10, but Marvel Spider-Man 2 is a 10 out of 10. It takes those stepping stones of Marvel Spider-Man 1 and just makes everything a lot better and faster. And that's exactly 1 point for me, but I would add even another point on top of that because their most hyped up villain in this game, Venom, was executed perfectly. But yeah, that's about it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a good one. Later.